Anthony Myint and Karen Leibowitz are the husband and wife co-founder of the Perennial and co-authors of Mission Street Food, Recipes and Ideas for an Improbable Restaurant. They often work together, but Myint is primarily a restaurateur whose projects include Mission Chinese Food in San Francisco and New York City, Commonwealth in San Francisco, and Mission Cantina in Manhattan. Leibowitz is primarily a food writer who has written for Lucky Peach, Food and Wine, and the New York Times, among other publications. She is also the co-author of Atelier Cren, Metamorphosis of Taste with Dominique Cren of Atelier Cren. Please welcome Karen Leibowitz and Anthony Myint. Hey, thanks so much. How are you? Is it clicker? Oh, great. Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Karen Leibowitz. This is my husband, Anthony Myint. We're here to talk about the Perennial, which is a restaurant that we opened in January. We've been in the restaurant business for a while, and we have a history of designing unusual concepts. Our first venture together, Mission Street Food, started as one of the first gourmet food trucks, morphed into one of the first pop-up restaurants, changed themes twice a week, invited guest chefs, gave away its profits to the food bank, and then evolved into Mission Chinese Food, which has been working to redefine American Chinese food since 2010 and has raised about $1 million for the San Francisco Food Bank. We're also partners in Commonwealth, which is a Michelin-starred restaurant that also follows a philanthropic business model. Since then, we've worked on some more normal restaurants, but we think that making restaurants always involves some systems design. Our goal over the years has been to use restaurants as a vehicle for communicating our values and our ideas, as well as serving delicious food. The Perennial is by far our most ambitious project in the sense that we're pushing the hardest against expectations of what a restaurant is and what it can do. The idea for the Perennial came to us shortly after our daughter was born in 2012, and we started to think more seriously about the future that she would inhabit. Up to that point, I'd say we recycled, we sometimes bought organic food, we carpooled when we could, but we sort of compartmentalized the environment as just one more thing, like earthquakes, that it was not very productive to worry about. But when she was born, we started to wonder, how can we design a restaurant that really engages the topic of sustainability?
So when we first started, we were primarily thinking about sustainability in terms of conservation. And so it was things like limiting food waste and energy efficiency and things like that. We spent a lot of time researching different equipment, a hood that only comes on, like the ventilation system, only comes on when there's particulate matter in the air, things like that. But at some point, we started to realize that the ingredients actually account for probably about 70% of a restaurant's carbon footprint. And we started to kind of think about food and climate change and how important those two things are. So in case people didn't know from reading books like Omnivore's Dilemma or documentaries like Food Inc., there are a lot of problems with the food system in the US. This slide just shows like a quick breakdown, and food is about half of greenhouse gas emissions. And then on the line chart, you kind of see some inflection points where the steel plow is invented, and then atmospheric carbon goes up. And then later, nitrogen plants that used to create bombs during World War II shift to fertilizer production. And you see another change in the graph. But basically, what we started to realize is that, this is kind of like a gloomy story that people don't want to think about, when in fact, agriculture has the potential to reverse climate change. So prior to like 1950, a lot of fertility was coming from cows and basically photosynthesis. Since then, we basically switched to focusing on soil chemistry and different things like that instead of focusing on soil biology. So it's pretty appropriate that we had these talks about germ harmony earlier because, agriculture is this place where we're growing living things and we're not even really focused or, historically haven't really even been focused on biology.
So, as Anthony mentioned, we started to think about agriculture as a way to create an optimistic way for people to engage with food. We learned about a project by the Land Institute, which is an agricultural advocacy group in Kansas led by Wes Jackson. And for the past decade or so, they'd been breeding a new kind of grain called kernza. Anthony is demonstrating its long roots. So kernza, unlike wheat, is a perennial. You can see the comparison between the amount of roots that wheat grows versus kernza. Huge swaths of the United States are covered with wheat crops, which are tilled and treated with artificial fertilizers year after year, and there are some pretty bad effects. We're losing topsoil, and fertilizer is running off into the Gulf of Mexico, where we've created a dead zone. Perennial plants, which are native to the area, are in contrast, able to rebuild the soil and work as a carbon sink. So the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is drawn in by the plants and used to build roots and also to support a whole ecosystem in the soil. And that is really the only thing that we know that can reverse or mitigate climate change. So when we heard about kernza, we got in touch with the Land Institute and got some of their grain, which we mill and have been making into kernza bread, which you'll be able to taste at lunch. We're the first restaurant outside of Kansas to do this, and we really love the bread made by our pastry chef, Nicola Carey. Oh, and this postcard was made by artist Wendy McNaughton to illustrate the difference between annual wheat and perennial kernza, and they're available at our restaurant. We present them with a check, and you'll see a few of these postcards.
So soil biology is extremely complex, and scientists recently discovered a substance called glomalin, which is kind of like a sticky glue that surrounds the hyphae on fungus that surrounds roots. And they didn't even know about this 20 years ago because it was too hard to kind of pull off of the roots or really learn about. I guess you could think about it as sort of like cotton candy in the soil. And so around all the roots, which are already really important and sort of under-considered, there's also this kind of like cotton candy in the soil. So basically that was a major breakthrough for us to kind of think about it as perennials being really important. Anytime you plow the land to grow your annual wheat, which has 500 million acres devoted to it in the world, you're plowing up that ecosystem and destroying it. And in addition to the roots being stored carbon, all of that network gets destroyed, and all of that is carbon and actually actively pulling carbon into the soil. So once you're on board with kind of that idea of perennial agriculture and soil microbiology being important, then you're basically ready to have your preconceptions about beef potentially be overturned. So I guess for me, historically, I had always thought of grass-fed beef as kind of an important thing. It's a little bit more expensive, but you're buying something that is not contributing to like a ton of antibiotics going into the system or into animals or whatever. You're buying like animals having a better life and not sitting in like a lagoon of manure. But what we realized after we started to do research is that basically grass-fed beef, if done correctly, has the potential to significantly reverse climate change, as Karen mentioned. So California has a lot of rangeland. If you drive around on the highways, you see like brown grassland. And so that's land that's not really suitable for crops. It's just grassland basically. And if we used it to raise grass-fed beef, and if we managed it the right way, if we managed just half of California's rangeland properly, that would offset the entire state's emissions. So I think that's a pretty gigantic impact and a really optimistic message, is that there is this room for agriculture to make a big difference. So hopefully now you're curious how that works, and that's where this postcard comes in. So as grass is growing above the ground, grass has like a, kind of S-shaped growth curve. Once it sprouts, photosynthesis takes hold and it grows really quickly. As it's growing, it's also creating root mass in the ground and kind of taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into both the roots and that ecosystem around the roots. Once it kind of reaches a certain level of maturity, it stops doing that unless a cow or a sheep is there to kind of nibble it. So the cow is playing an important role in taking it back to kind of that accelerated growth and carbon sequestration state. Then you can also have cows help convert fields from annuals to perennials. So having looked at the difference on this poster, for example, the perennial grasslands that we could be creating or recreating, I guess, have the potential to just be sequestering all that carbon and turning it into roots and turning it into the cotton candy around the roots of microbiology. And then this kind of carbon farming protocol was developed in conjunction with or by the Marin Carbon Project, and they also propose spreading a thin layer of compost on the field to jumpstart that microbiology. I think without that, the process still occurs, but it takes a little while. And so, again, doing all of these things in concert have the potential to just sequester an incredible amount of carbon and really reverse climate change if done on a large scale.
So with the Kernza and the carbon farming meat, we are really thinking about the potential for soil-based agriculture to store carbon, to become a carbon sink. There's one more piece of our puzzle, which is not soil-based. It's more concerned with minimizing food waste. So during the research phase of building the Perennial, we learned that if food waste were a nation, it would actually be the third worst source of greenhouse gas after the United States and China. So as restaurateurs, we wondered, what could we do to reduce food waste? And together with some experienced garden designers, we came up with a plan that involves aquaponics. We are taking the scraps from our kitchen and sorting them into a worm bin and fly bin, and then feeding our scraps to those bugs and dehydrating them, feeding the bugs to fish, mostly sturgeon. And then the fish fertilize the water that they grow in, that they inhabit. And that water we use to nourish plants. And there's actually a kind of symbiotic relationship there where what would be a pollutant, when people raise fish, the fish change the water that they're in, and it can become a source of pollution. Or you can add beneficial bacteria, which convert it into nitrates that plants need, and so allows you to not use artificial fertilizer. So we have a roof garden at the restaurant as well. We are using the water also to irrigate raised beds. We're not against soil at all, but we're also excited about this style of raising plants called aquaponics, which is like hydroponics in the sense that the plants float on rafts and their roots go down into the water rather than soil. But whereas hydroponics in general uses artificial fertilizer, our water is fertilized by the fish. It's got some amazing benefits, including Water efficiency, it's 10 times more efficient with water, 5 times more efficient with space, and really well suited to our urban environment. Our restaurant, the Perennial, is in downtown San Francisco, and one of the challenges that we set for ourselves designing it was how can we engage our consumers and also our staff in the sources of food and really thinking about where food comes from, sort of beyond just picking it up at the grocery store. And so aquaponics is a whole closed loop agricultural system that can be done on a very small plot of land. And actually ours is in West Oakland at the studio of our architect.
And then just really quick on aquaponics, basically it seems to us like it has the potential to be really like the way forward for urban farming. We came across a piece about an organization or a facility in Minneapolis called Urban Aquaponics, and it's in the former Ham's Brewing Company. It's a 6-level facility, and they currently have production on like 1 or 2 levels. When they're completely up and running, then they will be able to produce 150,000 pounds of fish and 700,000 pounds of lettuces a year. So this is in Minneapolis, which is probably not the ideal place to be growing lettuces. And so, there really is no reason as a country why we should be like packaging lettuces in clamshells and shipping them to Boston from California when you can just do this using the food waste of, the local economy. And then also going back to these earlier points about perennials, all those fields and acres that are planted with lettuces, for example, could just be produced in the city, and all those acres could be, that soil could be used to sequester more carbon. So this slide basically shows sort of like nutrient analysis comparing a USDA certified egg and an egg from a really reputable farm called Polyface in Virginia. And basically this slide is like farm to table 101. And, so you can see the nutrient differences are pretty like compelling, especially like vitamin E or different things. I think the bottom line says the food is worth more because it's better by any measurement. And it's true, like a USDA certified egg, really, the USDA certification doesn't have anything to do with nutrition or safety. The egg could be covered in, fecal matter or whatever thing. It could be completely devoid of nutrition. Basically, it's just certifying that the egg is not broken and that it's the right size. Worse yet, we're part of this system where the government basically subsidizes that egg by, making really cheap corn and soy available, all of which, by extension, are sort of produced with fossil fuels. And this is instead of eggs that were, grown from chickens that are grazing in the field and eating insects and healthy things. Part of that explains why the U.S. Or in America, we spend 6.4% of our income on food, and that is the lowest of any developed nation. So basically, years ago, I sort of had an idea of like eating only organic and these things as sort of like a bourgeoisie act or something extravagant. But in a way, like I've kind of taken a complete 180 and now feel like it's not an extravagance. It's just taking care of yourself and the planet and the farmers that are working to regenerate the land. So that was Farm to Table 101. And then I feel like at the Perennial, we're realistic. Our little restaurant is not going to, deal with enough food in absolute terms to really make a difference. But what we're trying to do is champion these new modes of agriculture, which are just getting started. And, in the case of carbon ranching, for example, if we buy a cow from a farmer who's raising his cattle that way, it's really just enabling that farmer to produce one more cow that way, or like do one more acre of his ranch that way. And so in a lot of ways, I think the takeaway is that eating is really an agricultural act.
We also, as Anthony mentioned, we had a big shift in our thinking from thinking about the restaurant in terms of conservation to thinking about it in terms of regeneration and actually doing something good and not just limiting the bad effects. In terms of the interior design of the space, we were thinking also about conservation of energy and of water. We used reclaimed wood, and the plaster on the walls that you see there were actually made from marble processing waste. We used recycled tile. We sort of went for it in terms of the materials that we used. You can see there's also a painting of the Kernza roots that it's not pictured, but there's the top of the Kernza as well. And in general, we were just trying to think about operations, especially in the bar. We have one big refrigerator instead of many little refrigerators under the bar, and then our bartenders can just reach in through a window into the walk-in fridge and serve drinks on tap. We have draft cocktails and draft wine as well as draft beer. I think in general, we think that the goal of having an environmentally sustainable restaurant is to champion these forms of progressive agriculture, but we're also trying to live that in terms of our interior and operational design.
And if you come into the Perennial for happy hour or for dinner, we are not there talking to you about any of this stuff at all.
So the last thing is we have all of these things that we've thought about and become so passionate about, and we've tried to teach our staff about and also teach them not to talk about it unless people are interested. So the idea is that people could come in and just have fun and not think about all the implications of the decisions, or they can engage with those ideas. And it's really up to the diner to decide. In the end, I think we want to encourage people to think about their food choices as a form of activism.
And to that end, here's like a lot of the, great books on the topic that we were reading for the last couple of years getting ready for this restaurant.
Yeah. Thanks.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing.
Yeah, of course. Thanks.
Fantastic. I don't think there's a better time now than to break for delicious and good for you lunch. This is a perfect time to go. Unless we have any extra time. Do we have any extra time for a couple questions? Do we? Anybody? What's that? 2 minutes. Does anybody have a question? Let's take a couple questions. Yeah.
I was wondering, what are the obstacles that you're facing? Sorry, I'm right here in the middle. Hi. As far as converting to perennials or aquaponics, is it awareness? Is it education? Is it government? Is it business? Like, what obstacles are in the way of this change that you're pioneering?
Well, I think when it comes to Kernza, one of the obstacles is just that it is so new. Only a few acres have been devoted to growing it, and so sourcing Kernza has been entirely through the Land Institute. And so I think anytime you're trying something new, there are sort of logistics to work out, and then also a lot to explain to our diners. But I think in general, the novelty of it has been exciting and has not stood in our way, really.
With Kernza, for example, it's literally priceless right now. We just bought 1,000 pounds of Kernza grain, and they were like, okay, but there's no price yet. So is that okay if we just charge you whatever we want later? And so,
okay.
Right. And so I think our hope is that, everybody would line up, be like, I can't wait to get Kernza once there's enough to get it.
Yeah. And our hope is that we won't be the only ones. I mean, to have an impact, it would hopefully be something that people would also want elsewhere.
Yeah, can you talk really quickly about the process you use to take some of these unique ingredients like kernza and then transform them into something delicious? So, for example, if you're making bread, kernza grain might not be palatable to the yeast that transforms that initial grain into something delicious. So, how did you go about doing that?
Also, kernza has slightly less gluten than traditional bread, so it's actually an intermediate wheatgrass. So you could think of using it the same way you would use rye or buckwheat. So it may not replace 100% of conventional wheat, but even if it replaced, 30%, that would be a really major accomplishment. Our pastry chef has been developing the recipe for, I don't know, a couple months, and it seems like the bread just keeps getting better.
Yeah. We were not personally developing the recipe. Our pastry chef did it, though she and I went and did some tests with Tartine Bakery. They're also playing around with it, and there are a few other bakers and chefs who are getting interested. And in general, it's been really heartwarming to see the spirit of collaboration where people are just excited to share information and we're not sort of jealously guarding the secrets of kernza. We're kind of charting a course together, which has been great.
The other thing that's weird about kernza is that, as we learned from a bread baker in New York who's working with it, unlike conventional wheat, the terroir matters a lot. So they tried some from Illinois and some from Kansas and some from Minnesota, and they were all very, very different, which actually makes sense because the roots go so much deeper that it's not just like that foot of soil, it's like what's 12 feet down. So I guess the regional differences might make for a whole new kind of like terroir of bread.
Do you find that from all the research that I see and that we do in terms of people and generations, this new generation that's happening right now are really concerned about everything that they buy and do and how they engage with brands and where they eat. They want to know where things are coming from, that they're sustainable. Do you see that in your clientele and the people that come in? Do you see this new generation of people coming through feeling that way?
I feel like we've discovered a whole range of the way that people engage with food and the way that people engage with the perennial. So some people just have a million questions, and then other people will get halfway through dinner and say, "Oh, is there a theme here?" And so I think in a way the takeaway is that there is no takeaway. That there's just so many ways to engage with these topics. So.
I feel like we're part of a generation that is almost like the first one that has been raised completely in like an industrial farming kind of culture in the US. And so in a lot of ways we're, embracing kind of like reconnecting to food and its roots, but also new ways to produce food that, people weren't even thinking about before climate change.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to see 30, 40, 50 of these restaurants. I think everybody else would too, all over the place. Whether you get that bread right or not.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And
Well, you
that
can
would
decide.
just be amazing. Any last
Try the
final
bread.
question before we break? Anybody? Cool. That was terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. It's an amazing morning. Thanks, everybody. Let's go out and grab a bite to eat, and then we have a whole new lineup of people to speak after lunch.